In this episode of IT SPARC Cast, SPARC sparks interest amongst the IT SPARC Cast team. Big Sleep goes from zero to hero, and the TP-Link zombies are coming. Welcome to IT SPARC Cast. I'm your host, John Barger.
And I'm your host, Lou Schmidt.
It's Friday, November 8th.
What a week.
IT SPARC Cast is a digest of IT news over the last week with insights, opinions, and a little sarcasm from two experts, each with over 20 years of experience working in IT or for IT vendors. And now, the news bites. According to Ars Technica, thousands of hacked TP-Link routers have been used in a year-long account takeover, as over 8,000 bots are sitting out there on these various TP-Link devices. So again, according to Ars Technica, hackers working on behalf of the Chinese government are using a large botnet of thousands of routers, cameras, and other internet-connected devices to perform highly invasive password spray attacks against the Microsoft Azure cloud service. The malicious network is made up of TP-Link routers, and was first documented in October of 2023 by a researcher who named it Botnet 7777. So this geographically dispersed collection of more than 16,000 compromised devices at its peak got its name from the exposed malicious port 7777. In July and again in August this year, security researchers from Sequoia IO and Team Simru reported that the botnet was still operational. All three reports said that Botnet 7777 was being used to skillfully perform password spraying, a form of attack that sends large numbers of login attempts from many different IP addresses. Because each individual device limits the login attempts, the carefully coordinated account takeover campaign is hard to detect by the targeted service. On Thursday, Microsoft reported that Covert Network 1658, its name for Botnet 777, is being used in multiple Chinese threat actors in an attempt to compromise targeted Azure accounts. The company said that the attack is highly evasive because the botnet, now established at around 8,000 strong, takes pains to conceal its malicious activity. This sounds pretty nasty.
Well, first of all, I'm not happy with anything being called TP being associated with a security attack because, quite frankly, I think we all have that. All jokes aside, what's really interesting, in my opinion, about this one is that they're coordinating the synchronization of the attacks from all the nodes. The secondary thing is there's that many unpatched routers out there. Now, this would be one of those lovely opportunities for a white hat organization to go in, compromise those routers, patch them, and get out again. We've seen that. It's happened.
100%. My take on this is that probably the majority of our customer base are not going to be directly impacted by these compromised devices. I would think it's more small business, home use, maybe some medium businesses, but I think there's going to be some of that out there. But I think this is more along the lines of something that we had talked about, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks ago in a previous episode where, some of these home devices are just never going to get patched. And then that's where the big security problem comes in, and where maybe cloud managed devices is really the future to kind of force some of these patches along.
I don't know. I mean, you could make the counter argument that all I have to do is compromise the cloud-based system, and then I own a whole bunch of bots. I think from our perspective, one of the best things we could do, look, these routers are not that expensive. We can offer our users inexpensive upgrades and security tips and clean some of this out. Sometimes it's just a matter of caring.
Yeah, I think that's right. And just a matter of, staying up to date on things like this and making sure you're aware of it. And, I said that about small business and home use, but I do remember doing a walkthrough on a fairly decent sized school system. We were doing discovery, and they were looking to do a complete network refresh. And what we found was in the drop ceiling, daisy-chained switches going from down the hallway. One of them was a TP-Link. There was an old 3Com switch in there. There was a Linksys in there. I mean, it was just kind of crazy the way it was all set up. But you might find that somebody had an emergency situation. They needed more ports. So they, whether it was through online shopping or going to the local electronics store, bought a TP link and plugged it in. It definitely could be in your network.
I got my start in this career field by doing forensic networking. It's something that most people never document their networks enough. Almost none of us have a complete picture of everything that's on our systems. So the one thing I could say is that offer your users some software package that allows them to see what's on there and check the firmware versions, if nothing else. There's a couple of, I think as enterprise or even small business or MSP, we need to sort of walk a little more forward than we've been comfortable with and see if we can proactively get. Now it's really tough because security is never overfunded.
Never. Yeah.
But you're in a position to have tremendous impact. You might be able to do something about this. If nothing else, we will look for applications that allow you to find out, do discovery on home networks. Maybe we can recommend those as tools later. But
speaking of applications and making an impact, talk about SPARC.
Yeah, this is a really fun one. So GitHub had their big Shindig user conference last week, and they announced this technical preview of something called SPARC. It's not spelled properly as our name is. It's spelled with a K, but it's an AI-driven natural language micro application creation system. So let me describe what this thing does, and then I'll tell you why I think it's so exciting. So basically, it's an AI-powered tool for creating and sharing micro apps. Now, micro apps doesn't mean they can't be complex. Micro apps take sort of the Unix design philosophy of keeping things simple. The application itself is more along the lines of being able to make a purpose-built application, but it can be quite complex. It's composed of 3 pieces. There's a natural language-based editor, which allows easily describing your ideas and refining them over time. There is a managed runtime environment that you input these natural language commands. And then there's an RWA-enabled dashboard, which lets you manage and launch your applications, which will be called SPARCs, from anywhere, right? So you can go into this system you created with a web browser, launch your applications from anything. And it also allows you to share these micro programs you build with this tool with friends. So you can say, hey, I've made this really cool stock watcher, or maybe you're running a D&D campaign and you want something that, keeps a stat sheet that everybody needs to be able to see. You can build it in natural language. So why am I excited about this? I definitely signed up for the preview. I doubt they're going to get around to me quickly. I'm not a heavy user of GitHub at this point, but what's cool about this thing is you describe what you want in natural language, and then it'll generate something. And then you say, no. What I want it to do is be this color, or move this over here, or add this. All in natural language, you iteratively interact with the tool to build this micro application. Now, John and I have been involved with efforts like this in the network space for years that have never panned out. Blockly was the last one we were talking about, which was a really, really good idea if they'd followed up on it. I think having a natural language interpreter to interactively design small applications is going to have a tremendous amount of impact on our day-to-day jobs. What do you think, dude?
I totally agree. And this is a really exciting area for me. I started my career as a software developer, writing code and doing all that, which I always loved coding. And I see this as really exciting for those that are not real strong on coding. I think you probably still want to understand the basics of coding. But one of the things that we have been telling network engineers for 5-10 years is you need to learn to code. because there's more DevOps situations going on out there. There's more situations where you need to customize your network. And the way you do that is through code and API calls. Maybe that'll be less important. Maybe having the basic skills of understanding what is a loop, what is a variable, what is a condition statement, things like that. But then allowing for somebody that doesn't have that strong coding background to still keep up. And I think that could be really exciting.
I think ultimately it's going to be the way it goes. I
Yeah.
mean, this thing appears to be, I haven't seen the sample code yet. The cool thing is that you get the code. So you can generate this application, go in, recode it, change, whatever loops and stuff you want, put it back in, and then still continue to interactively iterate it. So if if you're somebody like me who's just too darn lazy to get out there and do the code, but I spent a lot of time in TCL and expect and shell scripting and stuff like that. These are the things you pick up over time if you're in our business. And even just configuring a make file to build a program, you should be able to take a tool like this and build some really powerful applications. So I am very much looking forward to getting a chance to test this.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to definitely sign up and see if I can get access to it. I think, it could be useful for, home use. I could write apps for the kids, if, something specifically that they might want. I could see how this could be really applicable in an IT department. This could be really, really exciting.
Yeah, just little bits of helping. And, I would say, gosh, who would have been the first one to start on this? I mean, Apple and HyperCard?
No.
Well, they had sort of this on an Amiga. It was Rex that acted as an inter-process bus to tie applications together. And then the web came along. And in a way, I see this as the promise that we were originally looking at of the web fulfilled. Speaking of other incredibly useful AI things, though.
Yeah, according to a blog post on their website, in June, Google's Project Zero group introduced Project Naptime, which they call a framework for large language model-assisted vulnerability research. So what that means is that an LLM that can find vulnerabilities and problems in your code. They demonstrated its potential by improving the state-of-art performance in Meta's CyberSec Eval 2 benchmarks. Since then, Naptime has evolved into Project Big Sleep, which is a collaboration between Google's Project Zero and Google DeepMind. So taking those two groups and putting their work together. This week, they shared that the first real-world vulnerability was discovered by the Big Sleep agent. Now, this is a big deal. An exploitable stack buffer underflow in SQLite, a widely used open source database engine. Deep Sleep discovered the vulnerability in a pre-release code base, and then Google's Project Zero reported it to the developers in early October, who then fixed it in the same day. So fortunately, they found this and fixed it before it ever appeared in the official release. So no SQLite users were impacted.
That is so cool.
It's very cool. So it appears that this is the first public example of an AI agent finding previously unknown exploitable memory-safe issues in widely used real-world software. Earlier this year at the DARPA AI XCC event, team Atlanta discovered a null pointer dereference in SQLite, which inspired Google's team to use it for testing to see if they could find more serious vulnerabilities. I think this is another really exciting area. And we talked last week about how tools from Anthropic were going to be helping QA teams. This is another area where we could do that. So Anthropic was more about automating testing, but this is, doing validation testing on the code and spotting errors that humans are missing. So I think that's awesome.
So the thing that I found really compelling about this particular result is that there's a technique called fuzzing you use when security testing against your source code. And fuzzing is basically stuffing random data into any field that can accept a variable and seeing if it breaks the program, right? It is definitely a gold standard technique in security testing source code, security testing applications. And this particular exploit was not caught by the fuzzing that they had on the project. Now,
Wow.
they do remark, they do have all the, we've got the link, you'll get the link, but they do remark on the technical implementation of this particular vulnerability and why fuzzing might not have caught it in the configuration that the team had. Google is saying, the project team is saying, this is highly experimental. We got our first hit. I personally see this as yet another tool in our arsenal. This doesn't replace fuzzing. You're still going to fuzz.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
it's going to really boost what you can see.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So we had 2 AI stories in a row. And what I think I want to just reiterate is something that we've said in the past. People might see this and be worried that, well, I'm going to lose my QA job. And my take on this is that AI is not going to take your job, but somebody using AI might. This is one of those examples where you're more efficient, you can move faster and do more interesting things than worrying about, did I get all the right parameters in this case, a fuzzing database, or if it's writing a relatively straightforward minor app so that I can then move on and do something more interesting with network architecture or whatever it is that I might be working on. So that's what I see this as being really exciting. We're in a world now where instead of saying, I wish I could do something, just to have AI, whip something up or have AI test it for you and move on. And then you can do those things and just be much, much more efficient.
It would be really interesting to see a collision between the SPARC application and a powerful large language model that can do things. You should be automating everything you possibly could. You can. However, I must urge, you must understand what the automation does. It's the same reason why engineers, when you go through engineering school, we both have degrees. You get taught all this math, and then year 3, when you start getting hardcore in engineering, they teach you all of the simple ways to get around using the hard math. But you don't know when to use the tricks unless you understand the hard math.
Right.
So
Right.
it's like, it's a real challenge. And I think we're going to find ourselves in the same position in this AI era. You need to understand why it's being automated and how it's doing it. Then you can trust the tool. But let's talk about something old school now.
Now it's time for the CVE of the week.
So the CVE of the week this week comes to us from CSO Online. There's a new SharePoint vulnerability that is already being exploited. So I'm sure that anybody listening to this who's ever dealt with administering SharePoint, these are not new words you've heard. However, this one is CVE 2024-38094, and it was discovered all the way back. Now, here's the thing. It was discovered July 9th. Patch Tuesday addressed this, and there are still exploits happening in the wild. People are not patching. What is this thing doing? It is in the catalog of known vulnerabilities. Microsoft, for security reason, it was not specified on how the vulnerability was exploited in attacks. The public release of it was on 10/22. So when we gave CV the week off, maybe we shouldn't. This one popped out right around then, and it's a 7.2 on the OCRAPometer, which means it is not a vector in itself from what I've been able to determine, but it is, if I can get into your system, I now own SharePoint. Rapid7 was one of the ones who discovered this, reports that the attackers used this to gain unauthorized access to vulnerable SharePoint server and run a web shell. So my supposition on this is that folks didn't patch it because they said we don't allow SharePoint to be seen at all. It's all internal, right? Until they go and exploit your Outlook server, right? All they need is one shell in your system. Now they're behind your firewall. John, what do you got here?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with SharePoint. SharePoint ends up being the forgotten stepchild for IT. And at a couple of previous places I worked, SharePoint was just kind of thrown up and working, and then it was up to each department to build their own sites in it. And IT really saw it as an afterthought. So that's a type of lackadaisical thinking that I think that we all need to self-reflect and see, are we thinking about that about anything on our network or in our control? Because at the end of the day, if it's going to get compromised, then that's on us. It's on you. So folks, patch your services.
Please
do it, right?
patch your
And pay
stuff.
attention. Pay attention to it. You can't have unpatched TP-Link devices out there. You can't have unpatched SharePoint systems running out there. You've got to keep up to speed. I mean, it's a total pain, and none of us have enough time in the day, but this is just a big deal.
I would, if you don't have enough time in the day to patch your stuff, how are you going to have enough time in your day to deal with a breach?
Right. It's expensive to maintain all these systems, but have you priced out a breach? So that's something that we really need to be thinking about. And if we don't have enough, then that's maybe make a use case for more budget if you can. See what you can do.
And the key thing to caveating that when you're asking for budget is, how much will this breach cost our company? Now, the good news for folks who are in this bind right now is being able to get the cyber insurance that your public company requires has made it a lot easier for you to make a case to get resources to deal with this stuff. Whether you outsource this to an MSP, do it in-house with yourself, there's a lot of ways to get around this problem, but you have to do this.
That's a great point, Lou. And I think one of the most positive changes I've seen in security over the last 5 years is exactly that. So 5 years ago, anybody could get cybersecurity insurance without any kind of oversight. And then all these breaches happened, and these insurance companies had to spit out so much money that they then said, well, we're not going to insure you unless you have taken these things into account. And sometimes those things may or may not be as effective as they think, but at least they're auditing it and they're making sure that you're thinking about it and you're not just out there exposed and so forth. So
defense in depth. Now, one key point I would like to emphasize here, from our research, we found that this appears to impact only on-prem versions of SharePoint deployments. If you've deployed in the cloud, it's different.
Yeah, well, so Microsoft would have patched immediately, so that would make sense. And so, but it's a good point to make. Thank you, Lou. Now, with that, that's going to cover this week's episode. We couldn't do this podcast without listeners like you, and would love to hear what you think. Do you have a topic you want us to cover? Do you want to opine about how much you hate or love SharePoint? Am I wrong to have any hate for it at all, or do you feel similarly? Send us email, feedback@itsparkcast.com. That's feedback at itsparkcast.com, or at IT SPARC Cast on X. Be sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications. That's really going to help this channel grow. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, make sure that they're getting the same information that we hope you feel is very valuable. We'll be back on Wednesday with a brand new deep dive on remote work and how IT can better support them. And then on Friday with more news and opinions from the world of enterprise IT. Thanks for listening.
Come on back. We'll bring you more. Thank you.